All right, we now are at a point where we can start talking about functions. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a while loop that will go around this user choice menu. So for now, let's just do while for everything. So if I say while and then just give it a value of true, everything that is tabbed over in this while loop will execute when I am when the program starts. And so let's see this in action. We're going to need to tab over everything. So let's just select all of it and then hit the tab button, and that tabs it over. So now it's inside the while loop. So the while loop, all of this code will just continuously run. If I push the play button, now I'm given the option to convert from inches to millimeters. So here I convert from inches to millimeters, and I say that I have 25.4 inches. Okay, so I did get an error there. One thing we didn't change is let's actually change this value like we did in the other one. Let's change this to a float. All right, so that'll clear that error up. All right, so we'll interrupt that and we'll run it again. So convert from inches to millimeters, 25.4 inches equals 645.16 millimeters. Then notice that I actually get the menu option again, and I can do the same thing. Now I convert from millimeters to inches, and I say that I want to convert 25.4 millimeters, and that equals 1 inch, and the menu option pops up again. So the loop allows me to continuously run the program. So let's write our first function. We'll put it right here above the while loop. In order to create a function, we use the keyword def. So def means define. Okay, so we use def, and we're just writing pseudocode here. We're going to use def, and then we're going to give it the name of the function. The name should be descriptive, help me to understand what's happening in that function. Then we're going to do an opening and closing parentheses, and we will then do a semicolon. Okay, just like an if statement, anything that is tabbed over in a function anything that's tabbed over is going to run in the function. All right, so let's go ahead and create our first function. We're going to call this function def convert inches to millimeters. Then we're going to give it the brackets, and we will give it a semicolon. All right, now that we have that in place, we want to grab from our code the conversion from inches to millimeters. So right down here is where we are making the conversion. So I'm going to cut out all of this. And let's paste it, make sure that it's tabbed over, and we will paste it. All right, I'm going to keep this comment, but I'm going to delete the rest of this just to make it a little cleaner. Okay, and then we'll clean things up down here. All right, one of the issues that we are running into with this function is we are assigning this value output but we're not giving that value anything down here. Also, it doesn't know what user inches are. User inches is defined all the way down here. So let's run the code and see what happens. So right now, I'm not giving it the value as it says in this error message, it doesn't understand the value that I'm giving it. So let's go ahead and stop the function. What we need to do next is we need to provide it this information, user inches. Okay, so right here, this is known as a parameter. And you can use multiple parameters. Okay, so when I call the function, and we're going to call the function right here, I just say convert inches to millimeters, and you push tab and it'll complete. And then I pass it the thing that I want it to pass it. So in this case, I'm going to pass it user inches. Okay. In this value, and I can call the parameter anything I want. I'm just going to call it inches for now. Okay, so convert inches to millimeters, and I want to send this value that I got from the user. So user inches goes up here, and it contains now in this variable. So now I have to change this to inches. Okay, so inches is now the variable that will contain whatever is passed to it. Now, if I wanted to pass it something else, let's just say that it was like unit, then there would be another value. And if I wanted to use unit, I could say something here like print unit, okay, because I'm passing it in that value. I would then have to come down here and say the unit is inches. All right, so we're not going to do that because that'll make things complicated. But you can add a number of items to the parameter. So come back here. Let's delete unit, and let's delete this line. All right, so we are now calling this function, right? And everything from here to here is contained within the function. One of the things that we're not doing is we're not providing this information back to the conversion that's actually happening. So the print statement that's happening down here. This line of code, this does not understand output millimeters. I have that defined elsewhere, and it's outside of the scope. We won't get into too much detail about that, but I can't get to this variable. So what I can do in a function, I can just leave it like this, but what I can do in a function is I can return a value. So in this case, I want to return millimeters. And just to make this a little bit easier, to make sure that we don't get mixed up on what our variables are, let's change this. So let's call this millimeters. Okay, and so we want to return millimeters. All right, so that value would then return to wherever we called convert inches to millimeters. So if we come down here, convert inches to millimeters, we'll now have a value returned to it. So now let's set output equal to this returned value. And that returned value is the millimeters right here. So it returns millimeters. Okay, I'm going to get rid of all of this just to kind of clean things up. And let's get rid of this. And we'll get rid of some of this other comments just to kind of show how much we've been able to remove from the code. Okay. So we'll stop the program in case it was running, and let's go ahead and run it. Now all we've done right now is this convert inches to millimeters. Let's do a selection of 1, and let's do our 1 inch equals 25.4 millimeters. So we're back to the code doing essentially the same thing. Now you might be asking yourself, feels like we did a lot more work to have this function defined. The best part about this function is then we can call it in other circumstances, or we can do other things inside the function. So let's just, so we know that we are in the function, Okay, we'll just do one of these, and let's do, just so it's clean, we'll do a new line at the beginning and a new line at the end. Okay, we'll stop the code and run it again. Now when we do a selection of 1 and we select 1 inches, you can see here that it says in the function convert inches to millimeters. So if there was other things that I was going to do or needed to do within the function, I could continually do them here and then return a value. Okay? The things that are optional in a function are the return value as well as the parameters. You don't have to have either of these. It could have just performed the calculation and that's it. But this is kind of just showing you the example. All right, go ahead and pause the video, and what I want you to do is create a function that converts millimeters to inches. And so you're going to remove whatever code that you need out of this section right here, and you will then have a function that will make this happen. All right, hopefully you took the opportunity to try to figure this out on your own. If you got stuck, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I would do it. It could be done a few different ways, so there's not necessarily one right way or wrong way. The first thing that I need to do is I need to create the function, and here I will just define convert millimeters to inches. And I will be passing it a value, and I can call this whatever I want. Let's call it millimeters. Okay, so that's a variable that would be sent from where the function is called. All right, now I need to come down to my calculation, and that was this line here and this line here, and let's go ahead and cut that out with Control X, and we will paste it in place here, and then fix the tab. Now, one thing that you might have got caught up on is if you didn't name this user millimeters, it would never be able to get this value. So we'll grab this millimeters right here, and we'll paste it in place and make sure that we delete the user millimeters section. Okay, so when you highlight over this, it indicates that whatever value is passed to it is what this turns into. Okay, and then let's just, for clarity's sake, we'll break this down and call this inches, and we will return that value of inches. Okay, I'm going to come back up here and we'll remove this print statement. We don't need that anymore. Now, the next step, we need to be able to identify or call out the function. So right here is where we're going to call out the function. So you should have done something like, let's just call the function first, then we'll assign it. So we'll call it convert inches, and then if you hit tab, it should fill that up. Sorry, no, this is millimeters to inches. And the parameter that we are going to pass it is user mm. Okay, now even though this says user mm here, and this says millimeters, sorry, this one says millimeters, that value is just passed. This is just happens to be where I'm getting it. Now, sometimes programmers, they'll just keep these two the exact same, and there's good reasons to do that and bad reasons to do that. I like to separate them just to identify that this value goes to here, and this value goes to there. Okay? And then we need to actually assign this because we are returning inches. So we need to assign this to output inches. There we go. Struggled spelling that. All right, so we're output inches here, and that matches down here. And let's go ahead and delete that line. And we've kind of shortened up our program, mostly by just deleting comments, but now we have these functions up here, and they're not inside the while loop, right? They figured them out, and I'm calling out to them when needed. All right, so we will go ahead and save that and stop or interrupt if you haven't done that already, and let's run the program. Let's check for conversion from millimeters to inches, and we want to do 25.4, and we get, that is 1 inch. Let's check to make sure we didn't break the top one. So if we say 1 inch, and 1 inch equals 25.4. So now we've created functions that are outside of our while loop, and this allows us to kind of define certain capabilities of the code outside of our while loop. And next we'll see what another benefit of using a function. Another good reason to create a function and to use it is to decrease repeated code. So if we take a look right down here, we have essentially the exact same information presented right there. We also have the exact same information right here. And so while this isn't so bad, but let's say that we were doing 10 conversions and we're just essentially duplicating the same line. Now these are different, and I want you to think about how you could figure out what to do here, but everything else is essentially the same. Okay, so let's write a function for the final print statement. So let's call this, now because we're using it for both the inches and the millimeter conversion, we just want to call it maybe print results. Okay, so print results. And the parameter that we want to pass it, we want to pass it several things. So we want to pass it user inches. So in this case, we're giving it, we're getting user inches. So we want to say, what is the inches value? Okay. And we want to also have something with a millimeters value. Both of these have millimeters. So let's just call it millimeters. Okay. And we probably should pass it some information to tell it what conversion that we're trying to do, because we have to make changes to the statement right here and right here based on that. So let's just do conversion type, maybe we'll call it, and we'll come up with what that parameter is. Okay, and then we'll get a semicolon going on right here. So let's write some pseudocode to kind of figure out and get our mind around what needs to happen. So the first thing that needs to happen is I have some static text, right? And that'll probably be the last thing that I print, but maybe the first thing that it's fairly easy to understand. So print the static text. Okay, and the static text is the following. I have the length of... Okay, both statements have that. And then we'll just put, you know, some variable here. Remember, that doesn't contain any value, but we know that we need to put a variable there. And then we need to go with an additional variable. So this is the unit variable. Right, and we haven't defined that either. And then we need to add on to that is equal to. And then for clarity's sake, let's actually come back to this and we'll call this initial value. Sorry, initial. Let's not do variable, let's call it initial value. And then let's call this converted value. Okay, we haven't defined those. Those are simply just, we're putting them in kind of as a placeholder. And then we need to get the unit variable. Let's just call it unit V for conversion, converted. How about that? All right, and then we'll close that. And we'll come back here and call this unit V for initial. All right, so hopefully that makes sense, right? Because if this was in inches, then I would need to be able to tell this that this was inches as well. Okay, so that's actually the last thing that we need to do. Right here, we need to figure out which value is the initial value and which value is converted value. Okay. And now that we're kind of writing out the pseudocode, and this is the benefit of writing pseudocode, we can start to think about, do I really want to pass it inches and millimeters? Wouldn't it be better to pass it initial value and converted value? And just so that we're clear on how we're getting that information, initial value and converted value, here, down here, when we call the function, so right here when I call this function, I would call print results, and then the order in which I provide the variables would then determine which is the initial and which is the converted. So for the inches, my initial value would be user inches, right? User inches, and my converted value would be output in millimeters, right? And we might as well pass it in as a string. So right here, we'll pass it in as a string, just like we did the conversion down here. And we need one more of those. Okay, so now this function is saying go to here, up here in print results, and pass it user inches as the initial value, and then pass it output millimeter as the converted value. When I call that function in the, I'm just going to Control-C to copy. When I call that function in this case, I would pass it user millimeters, and take a minute to think about what would the other value that I pass it. Hopefully you came up with inches, right? Output inches, and I would pass that value up to the print statement. All right, so that actually made this function significantly easier in that we are passing and determining. We don't need to pass this information about conversion type. So we're going to take that out for now. All right, so in figuring this out, we actually don't even have to put a line of code because we've done that with our parameters. And once again, that's the benefit of thinking it through using pseudocode. So I'm going to delete that pseudocode. And we're going to think about, now we've defined or we've created this function. Now we need to figure out how are we going to determine the unit for the initial and unit for converted. Just so that it's not over, there's several things we could do, but just so it's not overly complicated, let's just pass those values from the function call. So unit variable for initial. Okay, so I can see that it matches because they're highlighted. And we will also pass it unit V for converted. Okay, and those two are matched as well. So this will be fed by this will be fed by that, and it looks like we have all of our statements. Now, I'm not saying that's the only way. There's actually a case statement or an if statement that we could do inside of here to be able to determine that, but I don't want to get too detailed on that. Now, an important thing is, right, we're not returning any value. We're doing something in this function, but we don't need to return a value like we did here when we returned inches and here when we returned millimeters. All right, so let's go back down here, and we need to pass it the information for the conversion. So on this first one, the initial value will be inches, and so I can just do something like this, right? I'm passing it a string, and the converted value, unit value, will be millimeters. Okay, and I just need to do the same here, and I'm going to do, this is millimeters. That's funny, I put a dot. You don't need a dot. Millimeters, and the next value that we would pass it, whoops, that one, is inches. Okay, now we can actually get rid of this line. For now, let's just comment it out in case we run into some errors, but let's just put a hashtag in front of there, and now that's commented out. And it may have seemed like, wow, that was a little bit more complicated, but think if we had 20 of these and we just had to continue, we just had to go up here and call, this line instead of, create it all fresh every time. Okay, so don't repeat yourself is a really good thing to think about when we're programming. All right, so let's stop or interrupt, and we'll go ahead and run the code, and we'll see if we have any errors. So right here, we're doing convert from inches to millimeters, and I have a 1 in there, and excuse me, the menu selection is 1, and then I want to convert 1 inch. And so I pass it 1 inch right there, and I get this print statement. Now, we got that before, but recall that this is actually happening up in my print function. Okay, so my print results function created this. Okay, let's see what it looks like. It added these dynamically, it added these dynamically, this and this. All right, and then let's see if we change this to a 2. And let's do 25.4. And once again, we have 25.4 millimeters is equal to 1.0 inches. All right, so that worked. One last thing that I want to cover in functions is just to tell you that they're very important. This is the way you should be programming, is utilizing functions, not line by line code. And we can see that an example of that is let's say that we got here and we thought this isn't a very good way for me to display these values. So let's just let's eliminate this whole front section. Okay, so I'm eliminating that part of the code, and all I'm going to put here is an equal sign. Okay, and I'm like, this makes maybe more sense, and I want to change it. Now, because I'm doing all my printing comes back to this function, this is now changed for all the code. If I were doing it the old way, this way, I would have to come in and make that change over and over again, and think if I was doing 20 of these, right? So let's see that in action, and we're just going to go ahead and do convert inches to millimeters, and we will select 1 inch right there, and we get 1 inch is equal to 25.4 millimeters. So the print statement has been changed for all conversions. Let's check number 2 as well. Whoops, 25.4. And we see that print statement has now changed for everything. Now, that was a simple example. However, that just shows the power of creating a function for repeatability, and so that you don't have to repeat yourself in writing the code.